Had to be all snazzy and start last week's video with a nice little montage, and now I'm all like, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna top that? The old YouTube rat race. Hello and welcome to FDS. My name is Nate and I am your host. Today we are talking about goldfishing. For those of you unaware, goldfishing is the concept of playing a game of Magic against nobody, as if you're playing a goldfish. That's where the name comes from. Pure goldfishing is when you play your fictional opponent and skip their turns, and then you win when you've done your 20 points of damage to them. I guess theoretically you could mill them out, but the math on that would be a little difficult. Some would say it's like playing Magic on ultra easy mode, or maybe even saying that you're playing it on God mode and you have complete control. Now, why would anybody want to play by themselves? Be honest, admit you like playing Magic without wearing pants. You can do that on Spell Table. Ooh, that's a good idea. But there's another reason. It can be a helpful way to tune your decks. I'm going to give you a couple of tips to help you better optimize your goldfishing if you want to use it to get better at deck building. Now, when you build a deck, there's a lot of math involved, ratios and that sort of thing. I'll be honest, I suck at all of that. I'm a very hands-on learner. When I build a deck, a lot of times I just need to play test it to see what I need to take out and what I want to keep in or what I want to add. Playing by yourself against no opponent can help with that, but you need to keep some things in mind as you do it so you can get the most out of the experience. Tip number one, it is extremely important to remember that playtesting a deck by yourself against no opponent is vastly different than playing against a live opponent. When you're playtesting a deck by yourself, the flow can go. There's nothing stopping it. There's no disruption. You're really playing half a game of Magic. You just have to focus on what's in your hand, what's on the board, what mana you have, and what can you do. There is no consideration of an opponent, what's on the board on their side, what they could potentially do. And even if you do add in little bits where you say, well, my opponent would probably have a creature out by now, so they would probably block my biggest creature. Yeah, you can throw that kind of stuff in, but you can't really know. Even in situations where you're pretending to play test it against a really good friend of yours who you've played their decks millions of times, it's still not going to be the real thing. You just need to understand that the flow of the game will be very different in goldfishing versus playing a live opponent. An important thing to remember that's part of this tip is that goldfishing is not good for assessing how good a deck will be at winning, nor will it be good at assessing the consistency of when it will win. Will it win consistently on turn 4? Goldfishing is horrible at that. And that's what this tip is. That's why a lot of people discount goldfishing as a tool in your tool belt to tune your deck. Goldfishing is for assessing other things with your deck. For example, tip number 2, pay attention to your opening hand and your draws as you play. When you play against an actual opponent, you may get hand disruption, you may get even deck disruption. But that is one thing that playtesting a deck by yourself is really good at, and that is giving you an idea of what your opening hands are going to look like and what your draws are going to look like. It's going to help you assess, is your mana curve working out the way you expected it to? You also will get an idea of how many times you have to mulligan. If you start playtesting a deck and you're finding that every time you draw your first 7 cards you have to mulligan at least once, then you need to look at your ratios of your mana to your spells and your creatures and see maybe do you need to tweak that. It also will give you an idea as you draw through your turns if your deck has a combo in it. Are you getting the pieces to the combo relatively quickly as you work through your draws? Now, once you add an opponent there who may see that you're building a combo, they might try to dismantle it. With that in mind, as you play test by yourself, verify that you're getting things to help keep your combo intact. Or do you have a backup plan? Is your backup plan in place as you're building your combo or as you're shoring up your strategy? And that actually leads me to tip number 3, which is it shows you how synergistic your deck is. Is your plan coming together? Now, the thing about this tip is that while it may show you that your deck is humming and it is working together and it's tuned, or at least you think it is, it may not behave that way against a live opponent. And I'm not even just talking about potential disruption like a counter spell or a burn spell or artifact destruction or land destruction. I'm talking about just your opponent having things on the board. It's going to change how you play the deck, fundamentally. While it may come together every time when you're playing it by yourself, it may never come together playing against an opponent. So then this tip is meaningless, right? Well, no, it isn't. Because if you're goldfishing and your deck isn't coming together, it isn't running smoothly, you're hitting a lot of bumps on the road, then that's really good information, because that's telling you your deck isn't working, because it's not coming together under optimum circumstances. So the chances of it working and coming together at a consistent rate when you're playing against live opponents is probably zero. You need to get the perfect opening hand, and we all know how often that happens. For some people, only their opponents get perfect hands. And as part of that, that brings us to tip number 4. It will show you what cards you need to remove and what cards you may want to add. If you're trying to get a particular strategy going and you're not able to do it, maybe because you don't have enough mana or you're not getting the card you need, then that might be a clue that you need to either add more mana, or do you have enough copies of the card that you need in the deck to be able to get this strategy to work. Another thing I look for when I'm solo playtesting is cards that I find myself never playing. Like maybe I was building the deck and I saw an artifact or an enchantment that I thought would really work and synergize with the combo or the strategy I was trying to make in the deck, the thesis, if you will. And I find after I goldfish for a while that every time I draw that card, it ends up being a dead card in my hand because I never want to use it. I would much rather use my mana on other things. After that happens a few times, that's a pretty good clue that I need to chuck that card. Another clue is when I draw a card and my first thought is, man, I wish this was something else. That's a pretty good indicator that it needs to get removed from the deck. And for my final tip, it is to understand that goldfishing is more effective for non-singleton formats. Now, I'm not saying that it's not effective for Commander or Oathbreaker or Canadian Highlander or other singleton formats that are out there, but there are a few changes to some of the tips if you are doing it for a singleton format. For example, when you're trying to see your mana curve and your strategy, is that coming together, it's on a higher level with Commander. Yes, you're looking at your mana curve to make sure you're getting what you need when you need it, but Commander games tend to go longer, so making sure you're hitting your drops every time might not be as important depending on the deck you're playing. Since Commander has multiple opponents, that means the potential disruption goes way up. So goldfishing with Commander or any other multiplayer format is going to be even more different than a live game. Also, since you can only have one card each, you can't quite say, I wish I had another Soul Ring in my deck. But if you're not getting the mana fixing or the mana rocks that you need, then you know you need to look at more options for your deck. Instead of helping you decide to add more of one specific card, it's helping you decide if you need to add one specific type of card. Just things to keep in mind if you're doing it with a singleton deck. Another thing, it can reveal interactions you may not have thought of. You may have put a card in the deck because you expected it to do one thing, but then you draw it while you're solo playtesting and you realize that it synergizes wonderfully with your commander. If you don't already, I highly encourage you to goldfish when you build a deck for the first time. Most people do. At the very least, they draw 7 cards to see what their opening hand would look like. I'm just suggesting take it a couple of steps further a couple of times. Another point is it's also a great way to learn your deck. Yeah, the deck is going to perform differently in a live interaction, but it's still good to be familiar with your deck and understand what cards do and how they interact with each other, even if your data points are in an optimum scenario. Like, subscribe, click on stuff. Goldfishing as a tool? Apparently I'm going through puberty. This show is part of the CIP network, inspiring creativity, one episode at a time.